The auctioneer's cry faltered in the oppressive July heat. No one in the dusty town of Crossline was bidding on Lot 13, a woman with haunted eyes and the small boy who clutched her hand. They were a burden ashamed to be sold for less than a mule. But as the final call was made, a lone cowboy just passing through heard the boy's voice cut through the crowd's indifference. It wasn't a cry, but a quiet plea directed only at him. "Please buy us, mister." In that moment, the cowboy looked at the woman on the block, saw the ghost of a love he'd buried 8 years ago, and knew he hadn't just ridden into a town. He'd ridden into a reckoning. I had meant to stop. I was passing through, heading nowhere in particular, as I often did these days. The trail had grown lonely since the war ended, since Mama passed, since the silence of my ranch had gotten so loud it begged for thunder. So I rode into town for salt and soap, and maybe just to remember how voices sound. That's when I heard it. A child's voice, small but sure, not begging, not crying. "Please buy us, mister." I turned slow. The world around me blurred. The clink of spurs, the rustle of skirts, even the hammering auctioneer's cry. All of it faded, hushed like some great hush before a sermon. And there he was, a boy maybe 4, stood barefoot on the auction block beside a woman. His hair was sun-whitened face smudged with dust, but his gaze, God help me, his gaze was steady, unafraid, hopeful in a way that hurt to look at. I blinked once, then my breath caught. The woman beside him turned her face toward mine, and time cracked like ice over a river. Annie Rose Delaney. 8 years gone. 8 years since she'd vanished, without word, without trace. Just a torn ribbon in a letter I never got to read. She looked thinner now, paler. Her golden hair, once braided down her back like a flax, and rope, was now chopped to her chin. Her dress hung loose on her frame. But her face, it was her. Older, yes, but with the same high cheekbones, the same storm gray eyes that used to make poetry sound like truth when she read aloud beneath the cottonwoods. She saw me, and maybe she didn't, or maybe she did and didn't want to believe it. Lot 13 barked the mayor acting auctioneer today. Female age 30, child male age 4, both in good health, sturdy stock, starting at $10 for the pair. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Low whistles, scoffs, 1 or 2 chuckles. Men leaned on fence posts, sizing her up like a sack of wheat. The boy gripped her hand tighter but didn't cry. I couldn't move. My boots felt nailed to the dirt. She ran off with a farmhand. I heard someone whispered behind me. "No, her husband's folks sold her. Said she was a burden. That's Delaney's shame child, ain't it?" Words buzzed like horseflies. Bitter, lazy things meant to draw blood. Annie kept her head high, proud in that quiet, final kind of way. Not defiant, just tired of kneeling. The boy Eli, she'd once said she liked that name, stared right at me like he knew me. Like something in his bones stirred in mine. I felt it deep in my chest, that strange tremble when a ghost walks through your soul and leaves it warmer, not colder. I stepped back into the shade of the blacksmith's awning. My pulse beat hard in my ears. Could it be, was she really Annie, or had the road and heat made me see things? Do I hear? 10. Griggs' voice rang out. 10 for the mother and child. No hands rose. 8. Still silence. Griggs' jaw tensed. 5. From the side. Maudie Fletch, a hard woman with sharper words and knives, snorted. "No man wants a soiled woman and another man's brat." "She is. That's trouble tied with twine." I knew Maudie. She carried gossip like some folks carried a Bible, always quoting it to others, never reading it to herself. Annie still hadn't looked my way again. But the boy Eli lifted one hand toward me, not waving, just reaching. I turned and walked toward my horse. I didn't get far. My boots scuffed the ground and I stopped under the heat, cursing the tightness in my throat. It didn't make sense. Why hadn't she sent for me? Why hadn't she fought harder? Had she chosen someone else? The last time I saw her was beneath a willow tree by the river. She'd kissed me, whispered she'd wait. Then she disappeared like morning mist. No grave, no goodbye, just gone. I'd buried her a dozen times in my mind, but now she stood here, auctioned off like furniture, silent, shamed, and still so terribly hers. The child was he mine, no, couldn't be. The years didn't add up. Could they? I leaned against my saddle. My hands trembled, just a little. "Final call," Griggs said. $3 for both. $3. Less than a good rifle, less than a mule. The crowd began to disperse. A few men laughed. Tossed coins moved on. I stared at the boy's bare feet, at the bruises just visible beneath the hem of Annie's skirt at her wrists where the skin was rubbed raw from rope. She never begged, not once. But her eyes, they looked once more in my direction, and they asked everything. I walked back. The sound of my boots on the dust sounded like gunfire in that silence. The crowd parted, sensing something was shifting. A wind picked up. The sheriff leaned forward. Grigg cleared his throat. I stopped 5 paces from the block. "Don't need to sell her," I said, voice low. Grigg squinted. "You going to buy her Maddox?" I nodded once. "She's yours then. Name and coin." I met Annie's eyes full on. Her face didn't break, but her hands did. One slipped free and pressed to her chest like she was holding something inside that threatened to spill. I reached into my coat, pulled out $5 and placed them in Grigg's callous hand. "No need for a name," I said. "She already knows it." The crowd whispered, then gasped. Maudie Fletch went pale. Annie lowered her gaze. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw tears fall, but she wiped them before they landed. I lifted the boy down first. He clung to me instantly like he'd done it before. I staggered from the weight of a child I didn't know, but maybe had always carried. Then I helped Annie down. She didn't speak, but her fingers touched mine. Rough, warm, unsure. We walked past the townsfolk, past the whispers, past the judgment. And as we did, the world so loud before it grew quiet again. I didn't know what she'd tell me, if she'd ever tell me anything at all. But I knew this. Something had broken, and something else was just beginning. Back at the block, the auction continued. New voices, new lots. But none of them would remember what happened next. Because as we reached the edge of town, just before the road dipped toward my ranch, Annie spoke for the first time. Not loud, not clear, just 6 words soft as wind over wheat. "I never stopped waiting for you." And that's when I stopped walking, because she said it like a confession. And I didn't know whether to fall to my knees or just keep walking and never let her go again. The wagon wheels creaked as we left town behind. Dust rose and curtains softening the shape of Crossline until it disappeared like a story no one wanted to remember. I kept my hand on the reins, eyes forward, but the silence behind me sat thick as wool. Eli had fallen asleep, curled against his mother's side, his head tucked into the crook of her arm. Annie hadn't said another word since those 6 that stopped me in my tracks. She just held him like a fragile promise, and I stole glances through the corner of my eye, trying to memorize what time had done to her. The sky stretched wide and blue, endless above the dry gold of the prairie. The cottonwoods along the river shimmered in the distance, like old friends nodding from far off. I thought of the tree we carved our initials into. How it must have grown deeper rings while we lived out separate winters. I wondered if it still bore the faded curve of Ursi pressed against my B, the only mark I ever made that didn't feel like damage. We pulled up to my ranch just as the wind shifted and the scent of approaching rain stirred the grass. The house stood plain and sturdy, its porch boards warped but faithful. No woman's touch had softened it in years. I'd stopped fixing things that weren't on the verge of breaking. Annie stepped down from the wagon slowly. Her shoes were worn thin, her gait favoring one side, like some injury had never quite healed right. She didn't look around or marvel or even ask whose place it was. She simply took Eli into her arms and waited on the dirt in the silence as if she expected to be sent away. I opened the front door and held it wide. She walked past me, her eyes lowered, but her shoulder brushed mine just enough to stir the breath from my chest. Inside, I set water to boil and brought out bread that had grown a little dry at the edges. She took a piece, tore it in half for the boy, and ate the rest without complaint. Only after Eli had curled up again, this time by the hearth wrapped in my coat, did she look at me. "I didn't leave you," she said. I nodded. "I know that now." She smoothed her skirt, hands trembling. "They took my letters, locked me up with the child once I told folks I was mad or wicked. Who my husband's family, the Delanys. They blamed Eli for everything. For my barrenness before, for their debts, for their son dying drunk and angry." Her voice stayed level, but the words felt like splinters dragged across, would slow and exact. "They traded us to a traitor. Said no woman with shame should carry their name." I leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me. I didn't ask more. Some stories don't need questions. They just need quiet. She looked at the fire. Her profile glowed soft in the orange light, and I saw the girl I once knew layered beneath the woman she'd become. Not vanished, just weathered. "You have no reason to believe me," she whispered. "You spoke with your eyes," I replied. I listened. The clock ticked loud in the stillness. Outside, the wind had picked up. Somewhere in the barn, a shutter flapped loose. The next morning, Crossline came knocking. First, it was Maudie Fletch. She brought a loaf of bread but wore a face like vinegar. "I come on behalf of decency," she said, eyes scanning the open door behind me. "Folks are saying things, Bo. They always do," I said, not unkindly. "This girl's not right for a respectable man. She got auctioned. Bo, that stain don't wash off." Annie stepped into the doorway just then. She didn't flinch or shrink, just stood with her hands calmly folded. "I never asked him to wash me clean," she said softly. "I only needed a roof." Maudie pursed her lips like she'd swallowed a thorn. "Well, we all got eyes." She left the bread but took her approval with her. 2 hours later, Mayor Griggs showed up on a mule hat in hand, but words sharp. Town council's whispering. "Maddox," he said, "you want trouble or you want peace?" "I want decency," I answered. "Then marry her or send her back." He didn't wait for an answer. Just tipped his hat, turned and rode off as if he'd delivered some holy decree. I closed the door slow. The latch clicked loud. Annie sat by the hearth again, Eli in her lap. She didn't look up. When I entered, "They always said I was something to get rid of," she said, voice flat. I knelt beside her, not touching, just near. "I don't need to own you," I murmured, "but I won't let them auction your name." Her head turned and her eyes met mine, wet, but not broken. "Would you carry my shame, Bo Maddox?" "No," I said, "I'd bury it next to my own." That night she sat beside me on the porch. The stars came out slow, one at a time, like timid things learning to trust the dark. Eli slept just inside the screen door, one hand holding the tail of my bandana. The fireflies blinked along the fence line, and somewhere far off a coyote sang a lonesome lullaby. Annie didn't speak, but her presence pressed gently against mine, the way warmth settles over skin after a long winter. In the days that followed, she found quiet things to mend. My torn shirts, a creaky hinge, a half-fallen fence. Not as a woman returning to a man, but as someone returning to herself. Eli followed me around the ranch like a shadow. He was light on his feet and asked questions without words. One morning he pointed at the cottonwood tree out back and asked, "Did you love my mama there?" I crouched beside him, heart stumbling. "Yes, son, I did." He looked at me long, then said, "Then you can be my papa." And just like that, the ground beneath me gave way to something new. But the town wasn't done. At Sunday service, the whispers curled like smoke. She bought herself a rancher. He's blinded by guilt, or worse. Can't trust a woman who wears another man's scar. Afterward, no one offered a pie. No one asked after the crops. We walked back in silence. Annie's hand not in mine but near, and I felt the weight of her pride pressing through the space between us. She didn't cry, not once, but I saw her blink fast as we crossed Main Street. I saw her bite her lip when Eli tugged at her dress, asking why no one said hello. We reached the house. She stood on the porch and turned to me. "I can go," she said. "You bought us out of shame. That don't mean you owe me kindness." I stepped closer. My voice came low, like something from the bottom of a well. "I didn't buy you. I remembered you." She stared at me, not blinking. Her shoulders rose and fell once. "I ain't used to kindness." "Then stay long enough to get used to it." That night I lit a second lamp for the table. Put down 3 plates, carved beef slow and careful. We didn't talk much, but something passed between us. Some invisible thread pulled tight. After supper, Eli climbed onto my lap without asking. Annie smiled faintly, then looked away. And then in a voice just above silence, she asked, "If I'd come back sooner, would you have waited?" I looked at her across the glow of the fire, across 8 years and every mischance between. "I was never waiting," I said. "I was surviving." She nodded slowly and then whispered, "Me too." Outside, rain finally began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, tapping the roof like forgiveness. She reached for my hand and I let her find it. Not clasped, not claimed, just held. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Not all at once, but like the edge of something painful softening. We sat that way for a long while. Then she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, I was always yours. I just couldn't get back. I closed my eyes because I knew what came next would change